Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today at the launch of The Challenges of Governance in a Complex World. This book collects the 4 IPS Nathan lectures delivered by Mr. Peter Ho, IPS's 3rd S.R. Nathan Fellow for the Study of Singapore. IPS is honored to have DPM Teo here with us today as our guest of honor. May I please welcome IPS Director Janadas Devan on stage to deliver his welcome remarks.
Deputy Prime Minister Teo Chee Hean, our 3rd S.R. Nathan Fellow, Peter Ho. DPM didn't believe me that we are classmates. Peter looks so much older than I do. but we really are classmates, distinguished friends and guests. Welcome to the launch of this book by Peter, a collection of his IPS Nathan lectures entitled The Challenges of Governance in a Complex World. We established this fellowship in 2013 on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of IPS founding. It was established to pay tribute to former President S.R. Nathan, an exceptional man whose service to Singapore was also extraordinary. It extended from the trade unions in the early 1960s through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and then Defense, and later academia as well as SPH before he ascended to the presidency. Unfortunately, President Nathan is no longer with us. As Peter said, his fellowship appointment in 2016 was a particularly poignant one because it is in the year that Mr. Nathan passed away. We raised about $6 million that included the matching grant from the government to endow the fellowship. I thank the individuals as well as the corporations. They donated generously to the fellowship, and as well as the IPS Corporate Associate Program donors who do so on a yearly basis for their kindness and generosity. I should place on record here that our first 3 fellows, Ho Kwang Ping, then Bilahari Kausikan, and finally Peter Ho, were all actually Mr. Nathan's personal choices. Because when I announced to him that we were ready to launch the fellowship, he gave me these 3 names as his preference to give the first 3 lecture series. So Peter is the last of Mr. Nathan's choices. He gave a total of 4 lectures on the challenges of governance in a complex world. His theme was Futures Thinking, which has been firmly established in the Singapore government's strategic planning and policy making, in large part because of Peter's early realization of its importance and his own decades of effort in this field. So I thank Peter for his excellent set of lectures. He didn't realize when he agreed to give this set of the 3rd S.R. Nathan lecture series that not only did he have to give lectures, but he then had to work on the book. But he has followed through every step of the way. Mr. Lim Siong Guan has just completed his series of lectures as our 4th S.R. Nathan Fellow. His theme was how to build a gracious and flourishing society in Singapore. And I'm most happy to announce today the identity of our 5th S.R. Nathan Fellow. She, and that is a hint, is our first female fellow, is none other than Dr. Cheong Koon Hian, the CEO of the Housing and Development Board. She will start her lectures in May of next year. We are deeply honored here to have DPM Teo join us. I don't know whether he wants me to place on record that he too is a contemporary of Peter's. But I thank you very much for agreeing to launch this book of Peter's 3rd S.R. Nathan lecture series. DPM Teo.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. I'm happy to join you at the book launch of The Challenges of Governance in a Complex World by Mr. Peter Ho. Let me first say a few words about Peter. We have known each other for some 45 years as friends and colleagues. In fact, we had an early life-changing experience together. We were freshly commissioned infantry officers, and one day the two of us were asked to report to the Istana. Before we could brace ourselves for it, we found ourselves in Mr. Lee Kuan Yew's office, standing before him. Mr. Lee explained that the Maritime Command, as the Navy was then called, was being built up and needed more officers. And he wanted us to go over from the Army. He said to us, "Young men, I would like you to give the Navy a try. You will give it a try, won't you?" Now, as you know, there's only one possible answer to that question. Both of us said, "Yes, sir," and we were out of the office and in the Navy. Well, Peter, at least, was an accomplished swimmer and lifesaver. The latter quality, I'm sure he came in useful, at least philosophically, from time to time later on in his career. We were struck that the Prime Minister would take time to meet two 18-year-olds just to convey what seemed to be a simple instruction, in fact, a posting order. I share with you this anecdote because it carries a lesson on leadership and the public service. The importance of looking at the big picture while also attending to the details, the little details of implementation. Looking at the long-term strategic planning and priorities while developing our human resources to match them. Over the next 4 decades, Peter and I have carried those lessons with us. We have worked closely together, and I must say we enjoyed working closely together, at least from my end. I haven't quite asked Peter whether he enjoyed working together with me, but I've certainly enjoyed working with him. And we worked together particularly at the Ministry of Defense, developing and implementing plans for the Navy, thinking through our defense policies strategically when Peter was Director of Policy and then Deputy Secretary of Policy in MINDEF, and initiating the transformation of the 3G SAF. Peter also served as the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for 6 years, where he built up our engagement with many countries, especially with ASEAN. We worked closely together when Peter was also concurrently Head of Civil Service from 2005 to 2010, where he led the public service to address many new cross-cutting challenges. Peter chose to take on wicked problems. He helped to overcome institutional silos and interests, setting up the National Security Coordination Secretariat, National Population and Talent Division, and the National Climate Change Secretariat to address cross-cutting national challenges. And these are all now integral elements of the PMO Strat Group and Center of Government structure that we have established and formalized. Peter is particularly associated with developing capabilities in another key area of governance that brings the whole of government together, and that is futures thinking and planning, to grapple with the growing complexity and uncertainties of our times. This is a tall order for many governments, as governments are typically focused on fighting the fires of the day. It takes intellectual honesty, imagination, and courage to acknowledge and take on challenges that, by definition, are not well defined, and for which there are no easy or definitive solutions. Peter also promoted openness and created space for civil servants at various levels to experiment and test their ideas. His advice to young officers was always, don't wait to be told what to do. Create your own reality. The public service and our public officers have indeed benefited from his more than 3 decades of stellar service in the public service. After retiring as Head of Civil Service in 2010, Peter continued to play a key role in thought leadership on his pet subject, strategic futures, as Senior Advisor to the Center for Strategic Futures and Senior Fellow with the Civil Service College. In 2016-17, he accepted the S.R. Nathan Fellowship from the Institute of Policy Studies. Through his IPS Nathan lectures and this book, his ideas on governance and managing complexity are now being shared with a wider audience. This book contains ideas that Peter is propounding not only after retiring from government, but developed over his years in service. For instance, he has adapted the use of black swans, the characterization of our cognitive biases, with that of the proverbial elephant in the room, to come up with a black elephant that we must guard against and address well before issues fester. As Peter put it, the government will have to assume new levels of entrepreneurship with its attendant risks and uncertainties. There is a need for a new paradigm in governance, one that is whole of government, networked, innovative, exploratory, and resilient. Peter has a lifelong passion for governance and remains highly committed to the well-being and future of Singapore. We continue to benefit from Peter's experience and ideas, given his roles as Senior Advisor to the Center for Strategic Futures, Chairman of the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Singapore, the Social Science Research Council, and the National Supercomputing Center Steering Committee, among others. In fact, we just met Peter twice last week, once at a very interesting research center, which he's the chairman of, on biofilms. Yet, little is known of Peter among the general public, and I know he prefers it that way, but his ideas and insights are important for the public, as they provide an appreciation of the challenges that we face and how we might approach them. This book bears rereading a few times, as the reader will surely uncover new insights each time. It is a valuable contribution to the scholarship on governance in Singapore. And I also hope that this book will inspire our young Singaporeans, the 18-year-olds of today, to consider a career in the public service and to create a better Singapore for our people and for future generations. It is now my honor and pleasure to launch Peter Ho's new book, The Challenges of Governance in a Complex World. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DPM. May I now invite Mr. Peter Ho on stage to deliver his speech.
DPM Teo Chee Hean, my classmate, Devan Janadas, rather than Janadas Devan, because we knew him as Devan Janadas in those days. I'm really very honored that DPM Teo Chee Hean has joined us this afternoon for this book launch, despite his very busy schedule. And I'm also very grateful for his kind words. He still looks like a Navy officer, not I. He has also outlasted me by several years and at the pinnacle of government. So I hope that one day he too will find the time to put pen to paper and write a substantial treatise on the challenges of governance in Singapore. And I think that is the book that should be read. Mine is just holding interim before that comes out. Now, the slim volume, which is being launched today, contains the 4 lectures that I delivered as S.R. Nathan Fellow for the Study of Singapore. It was once a fortnight between 5th April and 17th May 2017. If I'd known how much work it entailed, I think I would have turned it down flat But the basis for these lectures is my conviction that we have entered an era of great change. I described in one of the lectures the pace of change as having the lurch of an acceleration rather than the gentle sensation of velocity. This book is a modest effort to address the vital question of what it will take for Singapore to succeed in our VUCA world. VUCA means volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Or if you wish to use a fresh acronym from OECD, it is a tuna world. Turbulent, uncertain, novel, and ambiguous. VUCA or tuna, it is a world of great opportunity, but also of enormous risk. Advantage will go to those who are nimble enough to seize opportunity ahead of the pack while knowing how to manage the risk. How do we operate and succeed in such a world where change is happening often faster than governments are able to produce well-considered plans and policies? I believe that good governance is key. Of course, it includes the need for strong and wise leadership and effective civil service that together can produce the necessary plans, policies, and legislation that take the long-term view. But while these are necessary, they are not sufficient. In my lectures, I deployed a menagerie of metaphors: black swans, black elephants, even sacred cows, unknown unknowns, to explain the challenges of good governance in a VUCA world. We certainly cannot predict the future. We cannot fully anticipate all scenarios. There are no easy answers and no simple solutions to these challenges. Because of the complexity of the operating environment, government cannot assume that on its own it has the monopoly of wisdom and the best insights into every problem. Therefore, a new imperative is emerging, which is greater consultation and dialogue between government and both the private as well as people sectors. I believe that whole of government and even whole of nation will help define good governance in the future. In addition, good governance has to shift towards greater flexibility and an increased willingness to experiment with new ideas despite the risk of failure. It also means that we will have to learn to manage risk better and also to develop the resilience to cope with failure. Instead of developing a blame culture, evolving a culture of problem solving. Fern, my able research assistant from IPS, interviewed me a couple of weeks before the first lecture. She asked me what I hoped the audience would take away from the lectures, and this is what I said. It's a bit of a paraphrase. First, that they will understand that our environment is a fast-changing and complex one. Second, it is very easy to criticize from the side, but it is not easy at all to find the right answers. Third, that every major decision and every major policy is not an exercise in finding the absolute right answer. Instead, it is always an exercise in making the right judgment, not hard right, not hard wrong, but a balanced one that serves the best interests of the majority and the country. Fourth, that judgments have to be revisited now and again. What seems to be sensible today may in a few years' time no longer be sensible. We have to be prepared to constantly change. Fifth, you cannot make everyone happy. Despite these caveats, I believe that there is reason to be hopeful and optimistic. And this is because in Singapore, we have had 50 years of learning the lessons of good governance. The focus on outcomes, not on ideology. The emphasis on long-term gain, not short-term gratification. The ranking of the greater good of society over the narrow interests of the individual. Working together as a team rather than operating within silos, whether they are social, bureaucratic, or professional. These attitudes are now embedded in the value system, not just of government, I think, but of the community and the nation. They constitute an enormous strength, which gives me reason to be optimistic about Singapore's future, provided that we do not forget the hard-learned and hard-earned lessons of the last 50 years, and provided we are prepared to embrace change and act before change is forced upon us. There were some who wanted me to be more forceful, more critical, even controversial in putting across my points in these 4 lectures. I chose not to take that route, as I felt it was more important not just to take a balanced view, but to also explain within a theoretical framework the context of the challenges of government and of governance. Hence, the application of complexity and cognitive science to explain why these challenges arise and how we can respond. In my time in government, I found that people respond better when they understand the why, meaning the reasons, and not just the how, meaning just being told that this is the right thing to do. I hope that the lectures presented some of the challenges and actions of the Singapore government in a fresh light, providing new insights and demonstrating that in Singapore, we are now at the leading edge of governance. For me personally, the S.R. Nathan lectures and putting them together into a book made for a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I would not do it again, but I learned a lot in the process, personally. It forced me to review my experiences and to understand how my thinking evolved over more than 3 decades of service in government. I did discover some consistency in my thinking, although for a long time I did not have the proper analytical and theoretical framework to back them up. I would like to thank several people. Once again, DPM Teo for gracing this book launch. Second, all the donors who made this fellowship possible. Third, Devan Janadas for thinking of inviting me and then twisting my arm very hard to take up this fellowship. Fourth, IPS, especially Ariel Tan, for supporting me and my work throughout this fellowship. Fifth, many friends and colleagues, both inside and outside government, who consciously or unconsciously helped me with ideas and research. Sixth, Fern Yu, my able and dedicated research assistant from IPS. Seventh, World Scientific for publishing this book. And eighth, all of you for taking the trouble to attend this book launch. Finally, I would like to acknowledge with gratitude the late Mr. S.R. Nathan, after whom this fellowship is named. The fellowship provided me with the privilege and the platform to deliver the 4 lectures and the unique opportunity to convert them into a book. Mr. Nathan inspired and trained generations of public servants like me in the craft of government, and we owe him a debt of gratitude for his legacy in promoting good government and good governance in Singapore. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Ho. We would now like to invite DPM Teo and IPS Director on stage for the unveiling of the book. Please remove the veil. We now have a memento from IPS. We have a memento from IPS for Mr. Peter Ho. For Mr. Peter Ho. Yes. Thank you, DPM Teo, Mr. Ho, and Director. The book is now officially launched. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of this afternoon's proceedings. Following this, Mr. Ho will be happy to sign copies of his book purchased here today. Yep. Thank you all for... all the books that you have got free are signed, but if you'd like to purchase extra copies to be signed, or if you would like to get a message from Mr. Ho, please proceed to the left of the stage. And thank you all for spending your time with here this afternoon, and we wish you a happy holidays.